I really like keeping it simple when it comes to beat making on complex devices, because by starting simple, you allow yourself to get a little bit more crazy once you have the foundations of a song down. So I always like to start by finding a cool chord progression or a sample or something that I've recorded, or maybe something from a pack. This one's from a sample pack. We can see that it's 131 BPM based on the sample title. And I wanted to do something kind of in that range, but I felt like 131 was a bit too fast based on the percussion I kind of thought I wanted to have. So I just tapped something out and plugged these chord changes in. So I'm just parameter locking various triggers to different points in the sample to give it a bit of a different feel. And obviously you can hear I have the lo-fi effect on with a whole lot of sample rate reduction, a little bit crushing, a little bit of distortion, got some filter on there too. Got it kind of notched into exactly where I want it to be. I almost always program my kicks the same way on the Octatrack. In terms of how I set the filter, and just slightly pitch down the sample a little bit. I almost always do this regardless of the kick sample that I use. I find that a lot of different kick samples tend to come off as a little boomy on the Octatrack, especially because I like to use the compressor and sometimes add a little bit of filter distortion. I didn't do that here, but I still just stuck with my template that I use of cutting off a little bit of bass and pitching it down a bit. As you can hear, there's a lot going on with the kick track, which will become more apparent later in terms of why we're doing this. I've taken a fair amount of these, auxiliary syncopated hits and parameter locked the volume to be a little bit lower than the volume of what I would call the primary kicks, something that would fall on a downbeat or hit where a chord change happens to sort of emphasize that progression or emphasize the side chain that I programmed into this synth part, which I forgot to go over. I just set an LFO to the amplitude envelope. Speed is 32, mult is 16. We have it synced to the trig, and that's going to pulse it based on the first trig, regardless of the fact that we have, things that fall here and there and together. Works marvelously with a hi-hat pattern like this, which is pretty straightforward. I always adjust the filter on my instruments almost no matter what on the Octatrack, so my first FX block is unfortunately usually taken up by that. I do have some delay on this hi-hat, and also what I've done, which you can see by this yellow flashing, is I've parameter locked the volume to each and every step. Now, I don't do this individually, but I do the live recording of the parameter by holding record and hitting play, and then just cranking the volume knob to sidechain to the kick. Sidechain, of course, because it's manual volume adjustment. There's no actual compression happening here. Well, aside from the compressor that I have applied, but that's not really doing any sidechaining. So here are the first 3 tracks. We got our chord progression, we set up our kick sound and pattern, and we've established a hi-hat groove. Now these two kind of form the quintessential energy of the track. We've kind of injected it with this very pulsing, pushing sound, which sounds a lot faster than just a 4 on the floor 120 BPM house track. But it's only 4 BPM faster, and it's because we have this crazy busy kick track, which again was a decision we made based on how I wanted the energy of this track to be. And then a really busy hi-hat track as well with some delay and some dynamic volume contrast. We're gonna get real 80s with the snare sound here. I kind of went for this gated retro sound, but as you'll see, I kind of like to make it sound like you're getting punched in the face with a bag of potato chips. Okay, so it's not that crispy, but we have all these funny sort of Foley sounds going on. And I just want to play the snare track by itself and bring you through the pages so you can see where the trigs lie, and then we'll go through some of the individual sounds I've used. So first, again, we have just some basic filter applied to the overall track. And then we have reverb. The mix is totally dry on the main track, but as you can hear, we've applied some reverb to individual hits, which we've parameter locked to various additional tracks that we have set in various sample slots. So this is the main sound for the snare. And then I have like a jungle sample that I just ripped parts of. This sound right here, which is also the hi-hat sample. There's a duplicate of that on accident. An extra kick. So we have all of these sounds. And it just creates a vibe. This is a completely uncharacteristically infectiously happy song. It's kind of a bit out of my wheelhouse, but I was feeling it. Kind of feeling inspired by Geotic in particular. It's kind of like slightly melancholic, but like aggressively bouncy, mildly cheesy, and just super fun. So this is what we've got so far. And let's put in a respace. Let's hear that with just the percussion. It's a pretty growly respace. I do believe it is a respace. Oh, you know what? It's not a respace. I think I had a respace in there and I replaced it with this one-shot sound from a sample pack I downloaded recently. But it's just playing the chord progression. And sometimes I will enter that manually by parameter locking the pitch, but for this particular instance, I used the chromatic mode to play it in. I want to take a second to thank DistroKid for sponsoring this video. In case you're somehow not aware, DistroKid is a great independent platform for artists to distribute their music digitally across all corners of the internet on all of the streaming services you love or maybe hate and are familiar with. Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, etc., etc. The interface is brilliantly easy. If you haven't been to the website, you should go check it out, and I'll show you on screen how simple it is to upload a song. You basically just select a file the way you would any other upload, and while the song is uploading, you can enter in any information you want. If you have lyrics, go to town. Other credits or artists you've collaborated with, you can plop them in there too. DistroKid operates on an annual fee model, and if you use the link in the description of this video, you can get 7% off of your first year of subscription. I would definitely recommend checking it out if you're not familiar with it. And thanks again, DistroKid, for sponsoring this video. So track 7 is pretty fun in my opinion. I wanted some sort of melodic component here. Again, we started off with our chord progression, determined the sort of groove with the kick and the hi-hat, added in the snare for textural complexity, and then mimicked the chord progression with a bass synth. So now I wanted some melody or some otherwise atmospheric tech. And I found this breathy flute sample that I downloaded, and I did some weird stuff with it. So what we have going on here is, again, a filtered sample with the Octatrack's dark reverb effect, mix about halfway, and we have the mix set to a mix rather than a send. And this is because I have an LFO affecting the dark reverb mix. So it's a square wave, and it's basically creating a chop synced to that first trig, and it's kind of making this weird off-kilter pattern. Here's what it sounds like with no reverb. So here we just have the actual reverb value, 50% mixed. And the reason that we set the format of the mix to mix instead of send is because this can go 100% wet. And when it does, there's no dry signal. So it's both chopping the mix of the reverb in and out, but also the mix of the dry signal. We have the reverb sent a little bit to the left, and the main signal of this dry track set pretty hard to the right. So you get this pulsing rhythm, this atmospheric rhythm, and you get the actual melody of the synth itself. Using little tricks like this on the Octatrack is a great way to get more out of your individual tracks, where you have a simple melody going on, but you also have atmospheric reverb and like kind of a glitchy, lush pad at the same time. Super cool stuff. And all together, and lastly, I just put in this, oh, what is it? It's just a string sample, a violin sample that I have pitched a little bit and got some spring reverb on it. It's the type 2 balance is set to the left, and again, the sample itself is sent to the right. Maybe I'll change that so the actual dry sample is set to the left and the mix of the reverb is set to the right, so it'll kind of be the opposite of this. But it's just 2 notes. Something to fill in that sort of, you know, mid-frequency pad area, which I felt like wasn't quite occupied by this sample. But we'll see. I kind of threw that in last minute. So in summary, choose your chord progression, get a feel for your tempo, infuse some energy with a kick and a hi-hat, and add a snare. On top of the typical cadence of the snare, don't shy away from adding in some fun elemental textures to create some playfulness, or maybe some dark ambient percussive texture if you want to go that route. Add a bass line. Just mimic the chord progression, keep it simple. And then add some melodic texture if you're feeling a melody. It just so worked out at the same time that we added some atmospheric pads in with that, and some additional glitchy texture too. From here, I want to make a new pattern and alter the chord progression. Maybe start integrating different samples, change up the percussion a bit, change it to halftime, change the groove of the song. You can really start building songs quickly by thinking in blocks and then evolving separate elements of those blocks to create structure within your tune. But you got to start somewhere, and I've found that this is a pretty good template or foundation of building up a track that works really well for me. Thanks so much for stopping by, y'all. I appreciate you as always, and I hope to catch you next time. Peace.